Hello, happy Sunday, everyone. It is Sunday, April 18th, 2021, and you're watching the PoGo Weekly Digest on PogoPog, Politics and Government from People of Color. I'm in my bedroom today because I didn't want to do the whole, multiple lights from multiple angles, and I was like, I'm just going to find a corner in my bedroom where it looks decent. I got this cool little sign up here that says, fuck the police in the background. So welcome, everyone. It has been a busy, wild, and event-filled weeks. Joining me again this week on the panel is on the West Coast, Beacon, and the East Coast, Vega. Hello, everyone. How are you? Let's start with Vega.
How am I? I'm okay. I'm doing good personally. Just trying to mitigate the everyday anxiety that we have to live with. Trying to learn how to be better at that. So that's been that's how I've been recently.
Beacon, how are you? That was like a sigh, a sigh of solidarity. Beacon, how are you?
Yeah. I mean, apart from everything else going on in the world, it's been a good weekend. I got to see my best friend indoors without masks for the first time in about a year. So that was pretty awesome. Pretty stoked about
Where
that.
this thing? Let me find this thing. There's it's like a...
What thing?
I feel like...
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I feel like the DJ air horn was appropriate.
I love this professional oration you're running.
Absolutely.
I can't wait for us to be syndicated at 6 a.m. for drive time radio.
You do something. You let me know what sound effects you want, and I will make it happen.
I'm so glad we can depend on you, Friday.
Oh man! All right, sorry. You were saying you saw your friend for the first time without masks.
Yeah. That was great, but clearly the sound effects were greater, so I'm not going to try to beat that.
I'm here to make sound effects great again. That's what I'm here to do.
Too many initials. That's too many initials.
Oh boy. I'm doing good too. I actually spent the entire afternoon at my parents' house. I upgraded my mom's phone to an iPhone 12, and of course, when it comes time to upgrade anything for my mom or access anything from my mom, nobody remembers the passwords, and so I had to reset everything and do a backup. And I hope my mom isn't watching, or that my brothers aren't watching, because I may have inadvertently erased all of her phone data, but we're not telling anybody that yet. We're not going to tell anybody that yet. I'm going to wait a few days. I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to see what happens. And then I'm going to blame it on the cloud or something. So that's where I am. Hopefully none of them are watching.
Erase your mom's data.
Yeah, well, it was so I was already frustrated. I'd been there for 4 hours. I was like, first of all, I was like avoiding it. I was like just avoiding doing it. And so like every opportunity to do something else I could, I was like, sure, I'll have a beer with my dad, and sure, I'll hang out in the yard with my brother, and like everything that I could possibly do as a good son, I was like, I'm going to do it instead of doing the phone. And then it came down to it, and I wasn't paying attention to the screens on the phone, and I just started pushing pushing and pushing, and then the phone restarted to like that hello screen, and I was like, oh no.
Oh no, that's normal.
Yeah.
That's normal after any software update, actually.
Yeah, but I hadn't taken anything off the phone yet, so there's nothing that I guess so. So let's keep that amongst ourselves. If either of you get a Facebook friend request, yeah, that's right. If either of you get a Facebook friend request from Mercedes, like don't accept it.
Oh my god.
My mom is notorious for like saying mean things to me through my Facebook friends. So if you get a Facebook friend request saying why the fuck is my phone data gone, just ignore it and keep on moving. Okay, all right. Well, that was a fun little 5 minutes. Welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you for being here. It has been a very busy week. So many things have happened this week and the last week. Oh man, can you all hear the train? Did you all hear the train? No. Is it just me? I'm crazy.
No.
Okay. I'm literally like the train tracks are right behind me. So every time I hear the train pass, I'm sure everybody's like hearing the rumble of the train tracks, but good. Well, just me. I'm just going to sound completely out of it this entire session. People are like, Mom, Facebook, train tracks. That's it. Finally cracked.
Sound effects.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I should have said. I should have said it was just my sound effects. Train tracks are the sound effects that I have going. Anyway, all right. Get serious. There's been a lot of things that we have been trying to cover on the PoGo Weekly Digest for the past few weeks, and for some reason or the other, because of the capacity of the community, we've just not been able to. And so I was like, what better thing to do than try to put all of them into 1 to 2 hours as much as possible. And so I want to start with the most prevalent thing that's going on in the community right now, that has been going on for ever since my memory as a person on this earth, which is 37 years, can remember, and before that, which is the death and violence of people of color at the hands of police officers. And so in the last few weeks, again, a number of instances in which the police have murdered people of color has come up, and instances in which this white vigilanteism of white folk that think they can step up to people of color and commit acts of violence has happened. And I wanted to bring this up because I want to talk about it because one of the big things that I know that comes up, especially in communities of color, is the idea of defund the police, which we've talked about here extensively, versus abolish the police, which is a relatively new concept I know for myself and for many others. And so I want to talk about it because I think that it's important. I think that people need to hear and understand more about what that means, right? I think people hear abolition and abolish, and it's a scary concept. And I think that people also have these like preconceived or programming and conditioning that the police actually do protect us in some instances, or that they are necessary in order for us to function and to have like peace of mind. Or I think that people, when they hear of abolish the police, they're like, well, who's going to protect us then? And so I want to hold the conversation, and I want to hold the space, right? Because I think that it's important. And so to start off that, I just want to make sure everybody's aware, like trigger warnings, content warning, that we might be talking about some stuff that's heavy. I will never share videos of anything that happens, so you don't have to worry about visually seeing anything. But the content and the conversation that we are going to hold may be heavy because it is going to involve talking about the murder of members of our community at the hands of police officers and how the government has created a military police state in the country. And so I want to talk with that. And Vega, I would love for you to lead this conversation. And I'm going to be a little funny because you are our resident abolish everything person here on Pogo Pod. You're our resident abolish everything and Christmas and J-Lo. But I would love for you I would love for you to lead us, if you're comfortable, in just a conversation around how you arrived from the whole defund the police to abolish the police, right? And the military police state that exists in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start off by saying that I still have a lot of research to do in order to fully be able to speak from that perspective. I'm still learning. There's a lot to take in and a lot to kind of understand. But the way that I got here is just personal experience. I've never really had a positive experience with law enforcement. And it stuck out to me that was not a unique thing. Because initially, one of the things I used to tell myself growing up, especially when I started driving, oh, they're pulling me over because of this, and that. I wanted to find a way to rationalize how it was because of something that I was doing, because that was easier to understand than just a systemic wide issue. But once I started to really get a grasp on that and kind of really see it, policing for what it is, it wasn't that hard to arrive to a place where I was like, okay, we'll defund the police. Abolishing the police is something that it's only been in the last couple of years that I've taken that position. Because a lot of what a lot of people's fears, my fear is, okay, well, what do we do with everything once the cops are gone? How do we deal with things like intimate partner violence, or how do we deal? I mean, that's generally the first thing that I think of when I think of the times that people call the cops. And in having conversations with a lot of people who have been doing this work and research for a long time, they started to introduce to me the idea of different types of justice, what it could look like without police in power. And that really stuck out to me because I kept going back to the fact that my experience with the police is not a unique thing. So understanding that almost everybody that I knew that had a similar experience, a similar perspective on how they've been treated by the police, and it makes sense that something larger is happening. This isn't just an individual thing. This isn't just the few bad apples argument. This is a whole system. I mean, everything about policing as it stands right now. For example, we joke around about the fact that towards the end of the month they have to meet their ticket quota, right? That's not entirely untrue. There are quotas that they need to fill. There are statistics and numbers that they want to fudge around with in order to make their individual precincts look good. There was, I think, what was it? I think it's here in New York. There was a recent article that came out about how the New York police would purposely lose rape kits or just not offer them to people in order to keep their sexual assault numbers down, to make it look like the police have been improving the community. And it's things like that, okay, well, your number is going to look good, but what does that actually do to all the people that are actually suffering from sexual assault? Like, at no point in the way that police operate, just from the beginning to now, at no point have they been operating for the best interest of the community. The only time they do that is when it's an enclosed community comprised of all upper middle class white people. So it's very clearly an institution that's put into place in order to protect a small amount of people. And the fact that we have many, many professionals out here that are not only doing the work that we normally would call the police for, but doing it better than them, having better options. It made it easy for me to get to the point where I can comfortably say that we need to abolish the police. You look at things like, a lot of times police are rounding up like people who are homeless, and or like people with drug offenses, or people that are having a mental health issue. And at no point during that are we actually having them interact with people that can actually help them. Instead, we're punishing them for arbitrary laws that the police decide when they want to enforce. Instead of constantly ticketing and harassing people who are homeless, how about actually giving them homes, which we know we have plenty of? Obviously, it just means that there's not going to be a profit to be made, and that's ultimately where it comes back to what the police are there to stand for. They're there to protect the capital of the country more so than the community. Yeah, it just makes so much more sense, and I feel myself breathe easier imagining a world without police.
Yeah. And I think I would want to mention that the history of policing, like, is relatively modern, right? Especially here in the U.S., because the U.S. is a newer country, yes. Whatever that means. And in the beginning, like, mm-hmm. there was no formal police, right? There were these people that were like on a night watch, and they were there they existed to like patrol and enforce people that were engaging in sex work or gambling. And then when, it became a big thing was to manage slavery and to like make sure the interests of slave owners were maintained and watched out for. And so it's not that like this grand idea of the police was created to be like, we should create a force or a group of people that protect the citizenry. It's always been, there should be someone that's protecting the interests of money or property as it was deemed then. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to note that, because I think that many people just have this idea that the police have always existed to protect people and to serve, citizens or like community members of a place. And that's just like absolutely not true. Beacon, where do you stand?
I mean, the easiest way to... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vega.
No, just real quickly, I was just going to say that, like, you can go ahead and just ask people around you, as long as they're not white or upper middle class or middle class or anything like that. Ask the question, do you feel safer when the police are around? And the answer is most likely going to be no for so many people.
Yeah. I think to that point, before I go to Beacon, I absolutely feel that way. I feel like anytime I'm in the car and a cop car is near me, I believe that my anxiety shoots up, and like as a person of color, you automatically start thinking of all these wild things that you shouldn't be thinking about. Like, you're like, are my tags expired? Is my city sticker up to date? Like, are all of my lights functioning? Like, because as is evident in the last few weeks, like, the police will find any reason to pull you over and then use whatever it is, that ridiculous reason it is to pull you over, to see what else they can fish or find to use as an excuse to use against you. And at the end of the day, right now, the way it stands, one of the primary functions functions of the police force is to generate revenue for this country in a lot of different ways, through the prison industrial complex, through issuing of tickets, through impounding of cars, through like all of the shit that cops do. Beacon, where do you stand? I know that we've talked extensively before here about defunding the police, and to all of us that made absolute sense. And then Vegas started introducing these concepts about abolishing everything, including every day that ends with Y, and we were all starting to get on board with that. But where are you presently with your ideology around defunding the police and or abolishing the police, and how did you get there?
I mean, not a big fan of cops, obviously. I don't really, my thought process is that I don't see any other alternative to abolishing the police, because they're going to just find cheaper ways. If you defund the police, they're going to find cheaper ways to do the same things that they do now, right? I really don't see that any kind of shifting money around is really going to be helpful at any way. Because in Chicago, for example, and Chicago got all that COVID money, Mayor Lightfoot used a lot of that COVID relief money to just send it to the police, right? So politicians and the police state can find creative ways to shift money around to give police different responsibilities that allow them to do the same thing but wearing a different badge, or wearing, doing whatever. So them as an entity, regardless of whatever iteration they're in, is inherently a corrupt system that is damaging and lethal to marginalized people everywhere, right? There was in the news, or at least on social media, it was popping around of this elderly woman, I want to say in her 70s, that she was detained, thrown around, and kind of fucked around a little bit. And she had dementia. It was a misunderstanding of what was going on. There's no reason that cops should be laying their hands on a 70-year-old person at all. There really isn't any reason that you should be laying hands on a 70-year-old person. Not to mention someone that has dementia, not to mention all these other different things, right? They just are bad. I really don't see any other way to describe cops other than that they are bad. And so, yeah, I want to do the complete opposite of what we've been doing for ever since that they were founded, and just get the fuck rid of them. You look at the different things that they're supposed to be doing, quote unquote, as Vega mentioned, whether it's dealing with the homeless population, dealing with people that have drug issues, that have mental health issues, all these different things. They are not qualified for those things. That is not what they have training to do. We have mental health professionals that are able to better handle mental health issues than cops with trigger fingers, right? In LA, and I'm sure in other cities across the country, police, part of their official function is that they take homeless population from upper class, wealthier cities, white cities, and they ship them down to Skid Row. Literally, just throw them in a car, throw them in a van, and ship them down Skid Row. So it's literally, they're like a beautification crew, equivalent to landscapers that are trying to make rich, white, upper class cities not have to think about the problems that exist in the country. And how is that what we want them to be doing? Why do we want them to be doing that at all? There are infinite number of things to do to address the homeless problem in this country that doesn't include putting them in the back of a police vehicle, right? Yeah, and it just goes back to, I just don't see any option, because everything that we've been doing up until now has just led to more and more murdered bodies littering the street. And that can't continue, because I can't stand for that continuing, because if that does continue, eventually my body is going to be littering the street. And I really don't want that to happen. And I don't want that to happen to my family. I don't want that to happen to anyone that I'm close to, any of my friends. I don't want that to happen to anyone. Like, how are we really debating if we should keep a system that is constantly murdering its population, or if we should get rid of it and try something else? That doesn't seem to be much of a debate to me.
Yeah, and I think... Go ahead, Vega. You're going to say something.
Yeah, that I feel like a lot of the answer for what you're asking, Beacon, like why this is a debate, has a lot to do with the fact of how effective propaganda is to get people to feel as if it's the only option. Because we have decades upon decades of movies, TV shows, books, process, police appreciation days, police athletic leagues, and all this other stuff to try to make it seem so that we need this component in our society in order to function. And then everything else just supports that. Everything that we consume supports that idea. So it's hard for people to break out of that because, how do you break out of everything that you consume, everything that you experience, everything that you are told? It's a very hard thing to let go of.
Yeah, I mean,
much like any other abusive relationship.
Right. If you're so used to seeing Stabler's well-formed ass on Law and Order every single week, it's really hard to be able to turn around and be like, abolish the police.
Does he have a well-formed ass? I'm just...
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's not terrible. I'm not gonna lie.
I know that people often meme that like shower scene, but I not my cup of tea. But to each their own.
But yeah, I mean, I agree that it is. I agree that it is. Americans are comfortable. People in general get comfortable. And when you try to suggest that they change their comfortable behavior or their comfortable way of thinking, that their way of thinking is intrinsically connected to their understanding of what is and isn't in the world. And when you're trying to break someone away from what they believe is real, it's very difficult to do that. And obviously people are going to resist that to their dying breath.
Yeah.
I absolutely get that. I think that what I mean is that for those of us that are on the other side of the gun from police, as hypothetical in the combined marginalized populations, as marginalized people, I don't see how you can want that to stay the way it is and why you don't want there to be any change, right? Yeah. And the rich, wealthy white people and corporations obviously want to keep the police because it benefits them, right? There's no reason why they should want something that benefits them to go away. That makes sense. It's terrible, but it does make logical sense. But for those of us that are not benefiting from the police and in fact are at risk, literally physically at risk of the police, as a population, why aren't we wanting something different? Why aren't we wanting to get rid of that? Like if you have cancer in your body, you're going to go to a doctor and get that shit out, right? If you have something wrong with your body, you're going to go get that shit cut out. You're not going to keep it. And that is a cancer on society. Yeah. And we're all just like, we'll keep it. Yeah. And that's, it's not sustainable. It just isn't sustainable.
I think what you just said is also really important, Beacon, is that the people that are being impacted by police murders, police violence, and, acts against them are not your typical white, affluent, middle class person, right? And so those people might be experiencing perfectly cordial traffic stops in which, like, the officer's nice and kind and polite and doesn't automatically criminalize them and, like, gives them a warning or, like, gives them a ticket and they're on their way, or that, like, they, experience an officer helping them go out of their way, all that shit. And because they don't have those experiences, they're like, well, what do you mean? Why would I want to get rid of something that's working just fine for me? And so I think it's important. I think that's important to note, right? But I think that they do need to. I think a lot of people have, and a lot of people still need to have their eyes opened to the fact that there are a lot of us that don't have that experience. I don't know that I've ever had an interaction with a police officer in which I was not anxious, nervous, and afraid. And I think that is a reality that those people don't experience. And I think that that's important, why they also have to be faced with that, but also the other facts about why the police are completely useless in this country, right? Because some people don't understand that. They're just never going to understand that. They're like, police officers are nice to me. I say hello. They show up and mentor the kids, and, like, you see all those, like, videos that people post on social media about, like, the white cop that, like, plays basketball with the black kids, or, like, the white cop that, like, buys a car seat for, like, the Latino family so they can take their baby home from the hospital, and then everybody's like, oh, cops, yay. And so, like, I want to, like, be clear as to why the police is horrible. One, they murder people of color. That's, like, the main reason, right? They murder people of color. But they're also probably the most expensive thing in this country, not just because we dump a bunch of money into creating a military police state across the country, but I have the numbers for Chicago because that's where I'm from, but, like, the CPD, the 2020 CPD budget was $1.8 billion. That's what the city set aside to fund the Chicago Police Department, right? And including those 1.8 billion, they set aside 153 million to anticipate the legal settlements that they would have to settle for that year. So on top of us giving them almost $2 billion to buy squad cars, Kevlar, all of those gas masks,
Robot
the batons, dogs. The robot, oh my God, the fucking robot dogs, all of the money that we're giving them to equip themselves like a military state, they're setting aside an additional 153 million because they're anticipating that they're going to do something fucked up and they're going to have to settle a case in court, right? And in the last 10 years here in Illinois, or here in Chicago, the city has paid out $524 million in legal suits for the CPD. So that's anytime a police officer has a lawsuit that's against them or anything, and the city settles it out of court to avoid the embarrassment of going to trial. $524 million. So financially, it's a money pit. Police departments are money pits. You see them all the time posting these videos. I think it was a police department in Indiana that got a Tesla. And I'm like, what the fuck? what the fuck? Like a fucking Tesla? And so I think that it's a money pit of stuff that does nothing. The majority of times that you call the police, I'll give you an example. Like, my brother owns a business here in Chicago. I was, like, half asleep last week on Friday. I open, I get there, I accidentally hit the clicker to the garage door in our business, and before I could set the alarm off, right? So the alarm went off. I went in, I pressed the code, it went off. I was like, oh, I'm good to go. No one, like, the alarm company didn't call, the alarm got shut off. I thought it was good to go. 30 minutes later, the police showed up and said, oh, your alarm went off. And I'm like, even if you had shown up and the place had been robbed 30 minutes later, like that's a completely wasteless and inefficient use of your time. And so I think that I I absolutely
Domino's delivers faster.
Yeah, exactly. Like I could get a pizza. I could probably get DoorDash. I could probably get groceries delivered through Instacart faster than the police showed up to check on a business whose alarm had gotten triggered and they'd gotten called. And so I think that for me, the primary thing is that I want people to to understand is that the police are murdering people of color, and the police are murdering people of color for no just cause. They're murdering people of color because they have white supremacist like mentality. They're murdering people of color because of systemic racism that exists in police departments and training that is like based in systemic racism and white supremacy, and that those officers that are enacting them are white, but there are also officers of color that, because they're programmed and trained in those processes, are also murdering people of color. And that the police departments across the country are money pits that is just getting them to get all these toys that they can parade around when there's a protest or when there's a crowd, or so they can post it on social media, and also so that they can settle lawsuits for when they fuck up, you know? And so imagine being a business and being like, well, I know that every year we're going to fuck some shit up, so I'm going to set aside $200 million for those lawsuits that are bound to come. That's crazy. And so I think that for me, I want to make it tangible in people's minds. One, like the murdering of innocent people is like the absolute number one reason why they should no longer exist. But also it's a waste of money. People are always talking about, oh, where does the money for mental health services? Where is the money for like infrastructure programs? Where is the money for after school programming to keep kids off the streets after school? Well, it's going to your police departments. You know, here in, again, I'll speak locally in Chicago. The city of Chicago closed a bunch of mental health facilities. They started closing Chicago public schools and communities of color. And the Chicago Police Department's budget continued to increase. And then when violence continued to increase, and when young people did not have outlets and they weren't going home and they weren't going anywhere after school because there was no programming available, what do? They were hanging out in parks. They were hanging out with each other. You know, and then other shit happens because that's the reality of the world, you know? And so those are two things that, like, for me, I want to make sure people like have as a basis for this conversation around like abolish the police. Because I told Vega, when Vega introduced the concept, I was like, well, defund the police to me made absolute sense. Instantly, I was like, it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't I take money away from somebody that's like wasting it and put it into places that like absolutely need it, that will have actual programming, trained staff that know how to be equipped to handle situations like someone that's having a mental health crisis, right? And the conversation I had to have is like, well, why am I afraid of abolish the police? And it's those same thoughts that other people have, is like, well, what do we do? How do we function as a society when we don't have these protectors of the peace? And then I thought to myself, well, like, they really don't do that. Not once ever in my life have the police actually done anything that benefited me or like supported me or helped me in any way whatsoever. As a matter of fact, they've given me tickets. they've arrested me for having a suspended driver's license. They've impounded my car. You know, I've had a gun pointed at my face when they were doing a raid at a building next door. Like, all of those things have happened to me, and then not once have I been like, oh yeah, I remember that time that officer so-and-so was so great and like got me home safely when I was stranded. Like, no, I don't have those experiences. I have the complete opposite, you know? And so I think the conversation that I want people to start holding is like, the how do we function, or well, one is like why the police is horrible, murdering our fellow members of the community, and that they're wastes of money, but also like how do we function and move forward as a community without the police, right? And I started thinking and holding this conversation with myself when Vega introduced abolishing the police, and I started thinking to back when I worked in youth services. We had this thing, you know, in youth services, whenever there was an instance of something happening in the space, right? A young person harassing another young person, an instance of violence from one young person to another young person, and like the thing we never did in that space was call the police. Why? Because we know the police further criminalize our young people, and that it just is going to create a situation that could be handled internally amongst the community it'll make it worse, and you'll end up putting a young person into the criminal system, that shouldn't have to be there. And one of the things that they had that supported me in this, like, Abolish the Police, was we had this thing called CHAT. They had cute acronyms for everything. They called it CHAT, and it was Community Healing, Accountability, and Transformation. And basically, all of the staff members of the youth space would come together once a week, and they'd talk about the instances of what happened. They'd talk about all the details. If the young person wanted to be, like, present and say what had happened, or where they were at, or what led them to, like, whatever it is that they happened. And then everybody would talk about it, and they talk about creating a plan to allow this person to be accountable to the community, and then to find a way to transform that person, or for that person to have a transformation to become an accountable member of the community, and what they were going to do to work for towards the future. And I was like, it would take a lot of work, a lot of work, but we could have that. In our society, something can exist that is like that. And so I want people to have those tools and those ideas of, like, what they can start thinking, or how they can start envisioning a community that doesn't involve this, like, false idea that the police is there to protect them, and that they actually serve a function outside of protecting the interest of money and business.
Yeah,
that was a long rant. Long rant.
Just something that no, it's fine. It actually made me think about kind of like what's the core question that's being asked here, when it comes to thinking about abolishing the police. When it comes to looking at our prison industrial complex, our school to prison pipeline, our military industrial complex, the way we treat other countries, the way we kind of like manage access to funds and abilities for different communities, all of that comes back to a single question on what is justice. And I think that for very long we've been dictated to what justice is, and not been part of that conversation. And when we're not being part of that conversation, things like the aggressive police state, things like and stuff like that start popping up, because we weren't involved in the creation of justice in this country. And so the way to move forward is for us to go back to that question: what does justice mean for us? And finding a way for us to be able to have that conversation on a much larger scale, involving as many people as possible, in order for us to envision what a potential future world could look like.
Yeah.
A one without cops.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, do you guys, and like, this is a real question, right? This is completely unscripted. I'm like shooting from the hip here. Do you think it's possible to exist, like, think of your present communities that you live in, like your cities, like even more local, your communities. Can you envision a place where it's possible to have a community, like, developed system in which there is a general understanding of what justice is, what justice looks like, what accountability looks like? And there are existing models, right? Like restorative justice and transformative justice, which exist already, that folks could, like, build off of. But can you envision a community in which, like, it is a community developed set of standards for accountability, for transformation, for healing, to move forward? I often, like, the other thing too, right, is that people, they'll close their eyes and they're like, just don't see it, which is very real, because, like, a lot of us live in, like, communities that are targeted, or that are, like, often pegged as, like, criminal based communities. And so oftentimes, people close their eyes and, like, yeah, there's no way in hell that people are going to let us have a say. But can you all envision such a thing? Crickets.
No.
All right, folks, thanks for joining us this week.
No. It's the delay. This delay is, like, really screwing with me. Because I'm like, am I hearing, like...
You're like, is there more? Is he done?
It's like, apparently there's a gap of Beacon, go first.
Oh, Beacon, you're muted. I can't hear you. You're gonna have to minimize and.
No, I pressed mute on myself.
Oh, you're like
I
you
was, like,
intentionally did it.
fidgeting.
Okay.
I didn't want the fidgeting. Yeah, I fidget, so I didn't want the sounds to be picked up. But no, it is. Short answer is I don't know. Long answer is I hope so. I grew up on Star Trek. We've talked about Star Trek before. I grew up on that shit, and when I was a kid, I would go to the local library and sit in the library and just watch episode after episode of Star Trek, and then come home and watch episode after episode with my family. So I had a whole lot of Star Trek in my life from an early age, and the promise of Star Trek is a idealized world where you take the original series where on a single ship they had white people, they had a black woman, they had a Russian at the time, which that was crazy. They had an Asian man, and they had all of those main characters in leadership roles on the ship. It was a new concept for a lot of people. And then, as the different series that followed showcased how it is possible for the future for people to exist in the future where there isn't money, there isn't scarcity of resources, there is not a police state on Earth. Obviously, there could be a discussion about large military ships flying around space and colonizing other planets, but that is a whole other discussion. But when it comes to Earth specifically, that was the promise, right? And that is something that was always aspirational to me as a kid. That not only made me want to, be in space someday, because that just seems rad as fuck, but also to live in a society that is not as it is today. And I hope that it becomes reality, and it doesn't just exist in our minds and in science fiction. I do hope that there is a day where it actually does happen. And I think that it is possible. There is, when you have, however you want to define communities and community, when you have a bunch of people that have shared intentions, shared desires, shared ethics and morality, and shared hopes and dreams and whatnot, you can have everyone kind of moving forward in the same direction to accomplish a single goal. And so I think that if you have enough people get on board with that idea, it is possible. It's the hardest part is getting enough people on board, because when you're talking about doing something that is radically different from everything that we have known our entire lives, it is really, really hard for people to get out of their perceived comfort zones and get into something that is it's a lot easier to stick with something rather than go with something that you don't know. The thing that you don't know could be good, it could be bad, it could be the same. Who knows? Because we don't know. And getting people to step into the unknown is exceedingly difficult. And that's just a single person, let alone an entire country. Yeah. So is it possible? Yeah. Do I hope it happens? Absolutely.
Vega, before you answer, I do want to point out one thing that I feel is really important that you mentioned in Star Trek, right? In this ideal Star Trek world was like, there was no scarcity of resources, right? On Star Trek, if you were hungry, you went to the replicator and you asked it to make you food, and the food appeared. And so I think that one of the biggest issues that impact our communities is that there is this scarcity of resources. Communities are consistently competing to get access to food, access to housing, access to healthcare, access to equity. And so one of the big issues across the country and across the world is that there is this scarcity of resources, and communities of color are impacted greatly, right? And that happens in so many different ways. I think people often, it's hard because when you think of something, a lot of times you have your blinders on, right? And you're like, oh, well, housing is one issue and it's not tied into anything else. And housing has only things to do with this, right? And then people don't remember that, like, there are property companies, there are business owners that buy out a bunch of property in communities of color, and they don't do anything to that property. They hold it. They hold it until that community turns over. They never improve the property. They often will not come when services needs to happen, when fixing needs to get done. They often just charge your rent and they just turn it over. And then when the communities change or the community gentrifies, all of a sudden everybody gets kicked out. They rehab the buildings, or they sell it to developers to build condos, and all of a sudden this cycle where, like, the community is getting gentrified out happens, and housing is a much greater issue than just like housing, right? Same thing with food. Those same communities of color often are food deserts, where you have to leave the community or go really far from home to get access to a grocery store, or you only have access to corner stores that have limited amounts. They don't have fresh produce or anything like that. And so there are all these things that are tied into the greater issues, like, you know, abolishing the police, that have everything to do with housing, healthcare, equity, economics. And so I just wanted to point that out because I think that it's really important to do that. If we lived in a world where, you know, resources were like rapidly available to everyone, if anyone in a community of color can go to a replicator and tell it to make its food, and, like, you know, the glittery lights would come on and, like, you'd get whatever you wanted, like, that would be amazing and beautiful, and it would solve one of many issues going on in the world. But it's not going to solve everything because there's so many interconnected issues that are happening at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Earl Grey is not my favorite tea, but if I did have a replicator, I would be ordering Earl Grey hot all the fucking time. But I mean, like, so what you were saying about, you know, scarcity of resources is real, but it's also not real at the same time, right? You know, Vega pointed out that there is a housing surplus, but because of economics, because of capitalism, there are still homeless people when there are a lot of homes available. When at the beginning of COVID, we saw, you know, photos and videos of, like, shit ton of milk being poured out and meat being thrown away and, you know, different produce getting tossed because it was, you know, going bad, because restaurants weren't operating, all that stuff. So there are the resources, but it isn't getting to the people that need it. So it's not necessarily a resource issue. It is a willingness to get resources to the people that need it the most, rather than, you know, saving it for wealthy restaurants and all that stuff. So there are resources for food. There are resources for housing. And, you know, when you look at the healthcare side of things, it is possible to have universal healthcare coverage in America, which is exemplified and shown by the fact that anyone was able to get a COVID test for free. Anyone was able to get the vaccine for free, right? So we are, as a country, able to distribute medical attention on a universal scale without cost, you know, upfront cost, taxes, yes. But that is possible. But because this country doesn't want to do it, because this country doesn't want to, you know, have sufficient public housing or just free housing for homeless people, because we don't want to have distribution and make resources, food resources available to its population, we're stuck in all these different problems.
Yep. Or they want to make those people jump through a million hoops before they can access those resources, right? Like homeless people, so many cities across the country don't operate on a housing first model, right? They're like, whoa, well, a homeless person, in order to, like, achieve self-sufficiency, well, they need to get a job and they need to have clothes, and you're sitting there like, what? Like, the first thing that a homeless person needs is somewhere to live before they can get to any of those things. But people are like, well, let's get them a job. And you're like, okay, well, where is that person going to be living while like they're working? Where are they going to shower? Where are they going to keep their things? And they have to worry about transportation. But people are often like, well, housing first model is like, that's not the answer. The answer is not to house the homeless.
Well, and there's a couple else other components to that too, and this was an issue in LA years ago when I did like a couple of days worth of homeless work. So I'm not even going to claim that on my fucking resume. But there was the issue of to get money you have to have a job. To get a job you have to have housing. To get housing you have to have a job. So like, how the fuck is any of that supposed to happen if you can't get anywhere in that process? And in Echo Park, cops were clearing out Echo Park in LA pretty recently, removing the homeless population to clean the park and to clean the lake and all that. And really all it was just the local white residents were not a big fan of homeless people living anywhere they possibly fucking could, right? And the politicians were like, no, it's okay. We're giving them housing. We're not clearing them out onto the street. We're taking those people from here and taking them to housing. But what they weren't saying is that all of the possessions that these people owned, they weren't allowed to bring it with them. They're like, you have one bag. Bring whatever you can put in that bag. That's it. If you have tools for construction, those are deemed as weapons, so you can't bring them. Like all these different things like that. So it's just, it just reveals how little politicians and this country in general actually cares about resolving these issues. Yeah. It is just about sweeping them under the rug.
Yeah.
And again, to use the same word I used earlier, it's just not sustainable. When you have wealthy empires, historically, they get to a point where they cannot sustain being an empire, and they crumble.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a person that worked in homeless services for a long time, I can attest to that. The city of Chicago does a homeless count annually, and they pick like one of the coldest nights of the year, which is when you get the least accurate counts. And so you'll be out there on a winter night, and homeless people on a winter night, they're not out on the street. They're finding shelter. They're in emergency rooms. They're in overnight shelters. They're in abandoned buildings. They're riding the train all night. They're not out there in the elements. And so the homeless count's always lower than it actually would. And it's also an unrealistic expectation to get an accurate count of the amount of people that are homeless in the city of Chicago by walking the streets in targeted areas, because homeless people are everywhere. And homeless people, the definition of homeless people is not just someone that's out on the streets. If you are couch surfing, if you are staying with someone and you're not the primary leaseholder, you're staying with a friend until things get better, that is a homeless person. And so it's all the things that are done to like try to like say that things are being done, like, yeah, we're out there on the streets, we're giving them sandwiches, we're counting heads, but really you're just like trying to hide the much bigger problem. We have digressed incredibly.
No. I think we have progressed because I think it's all connected.
But Vega, I do want to hear from you. Like, can you? I like to bring us back. Can you envision that place where we as community develop the idea of like accountability, transformation, and like, can you close your eyes and see that place?
The short answer is yes. Let me get to it first, because I just really quickly want to touch upon.
Absolutely, you can talk about whatever you want.
Stuff that you talked about before. Well, first, like with the whole like counting of the homeless people, that's so obviously done on purpose, because then you get a lower number, and you can show to all the people, look, we're improving our homeless situation.
Yep.
It's so blatant what they're doing. It's just ridiculous. And then I love that you all were talking about the like the scarcity of resources, and touching upon the fact that it is a manufactured scarcity of resources. Because the reality is, it's not that we don't have the stuff, is that we don't have a way to get the stuff while also participating in capitalism.
Yep.
Like, everything is being made for the purposes of profiting, and therefore, if there's no profit to be made, you do not get the resources. And that's where a lot of these issues lie.
Yep.
Because I'll just stop there. And to your initial question, I can actually, like, when you were speaking, I thought about my last apartment building that I was in. And I remember, I'm really bad with names, but there was like this older lady on the third floor, like she was like in her mid 90s, and always had an issue because our elevator was constantly breaking down. And so what would happen is that different people would offer to do shopping for her, or if somebody needed to get the mail, I remember helping. There was this other woman who worked at the post office, who would also tell us all the stuff that the city is doing that we haven't been told. A tenants association was formed in our building. What else? Like, there were so many ways in which the community that I was in was looking out for each other, despite the fact that it's very fragmented. You have all the gentrifiers coming in from the Midwest. You have, this kind of like mixed situation where people of different income are together, and therefore the people with the larger income are like always trying to do something to get rid of the people with the lower income. You have all of that strife going on, and yet despite all that, there are still community mainstays, people that a lot of people know and turn to or look out for or help in order to kind of address the different needs that aren't being met by people in power. So when I think about a society like that, I think about that. I think about things like that, how groups of people get together, talk about what they need, and find ways to achieve it. And I think that, like, it's that simple. Like, if we all think about the specifically, you can see kind of like the beginnings of something like that. Like, there's always like an older person that just knows all these things. There's always somebody else who's always looking out for everybody, and like, oh, hey, by the way, your grass is a little too tall, do this before they give you a ticket. Like, there's people already inherently want to form communities, and at every point that we're doing that, the police are being forced in to kind of like drive that wedge. So therefore we have to rely on the police to get what we need.
Yeah.
So yes, I can imagine a world without it.
I mean, I think that you just reminded me of a lot of beautiful things, right? There are co-ops all over the country and the world that exist. And these cooperatives are in a bunch of different ways, right? There are cooperatives in buildings, right? They all live together. They commune together. They will like have a community fund for making meals. They all share in chores. They pay the bills collectively. There are urban farm cooperatives where communities come together and grow vegetables and then have them for themselves, but also sell them and give to the community. So yes, there are vibrant cooperative communities that are existing and that are holding accountability and transformation, and they're restoring faith in each other, and they exist. So, I mean, the purpose of the question was to like show that these things are possible. They're hard. They take a lot of work, and they're new.
Of course.
They're new now. They've always existed, but they're now making a resurgence. And so they're new. It's new ideology that people are not aware of in the present, right? They've existed in the past. And so people have to like wrap their heads around it. They have to experience it. They have to experience some beautiful, vibrant community like you're building, that it wasn't something official. It was just like a cooperative of people that lived in the same building that came together and started supporting each other and loving each other and watching out for each other. Or the intentional communities that are like intentionally having cooperatives to live together, share in the resources, share in paying the bills, and like sharing in like community. And so all of these things do exist. It is possible. I can close my eyes and I can see it getting there, like my vision in getting there. Like, I see a long way to get there, but I can see it. I think it's possible. I want people to start holding these conversations with themselves and with others. I want them to have reflections on how you can have like accountability and transformation, and you don't have to have a militarized police state that is there to protect you, but not really. And so I know I know there are many people that I have talked to that were like, oh, abolish, absolutely, it makes sense. Abolishing it, or not abolishing, defunding. They're like, defunding makes absolute sense. Take the resources away from all these other things and give them to these things that are going to do good things. And then I was like, yeah, well, what about abolishing? And like that conversation makes them very uncomfortable. And that's okay. It's okay to exist and to live in that discomfort. It's okay to be there. It's okay for it to scare you. It's okay for all of those things to be real. Like, it is okay. And then you have to like see that it is possible to move past that programming and conditioning and that false sense of like ideology we have that police are actually there to protect us, and to realize that it's just a waste of money, and that in fact they are hurting us, they are harming us, and they are murdering us. And so I just wanted to hold this conversation, right? Like that, not scripted, all based on ideology, because I want people to know that it's possible. And I want other people of color to start holding the conversation around abolishing police and abolishing other structures of like patriarchy and like capitalism that, you know, are hard because they're part of our everyday life and like programming that we exist in here in the US. But they are possible. Don't worry. You know, getting ourselves out of capitalism is coming soon. It's coming soon. Comrade Vega is going to lead us through that.
Oh, God, no. Leading? No. There are way more capable people who are able to lead us into that future.
So yes, I hope that people are able to like take, and there are tons of resources. One of the things that I did for myself, because I wanted to fully start embracing the idea of abolishment, is I picked up this book, like We Do This Till We Free Us. It's a book on abolition, organizing, and transformative justice. And so I want folks to know that this is not new ideology. It exists. There are people that are actively practicing it. There are people that are actively writing and engaged in the abolishment of these systems that oppress us and murder us. And there are people that are actively engaged in getting us to that place where we can have a community developed system of accountability transformation that allows us to live and thrive and exist. So yay. Before we move into more heavy, I just want to say, can we see your nails, Beacon? Because you have been doing many hand movements, and I'm just like, oh my God, what? Oh, and of course, Beacon froze. Okay, here we go. Oh,
Ooh,
all right. Is that a blue and like a purple and a metallic?
Yeah, and then the thumb is also blue too. So
cool. It looks really cool. Those colors were very distracting. I was like, don't lose your train of thought. Like, I was like, don't be mesmerized by the nails. I love shiny things, and I'm just like following your fingers every time your hands are doing movements. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the labor movement in the U.S. and specifically as it's come up more recently because of this voting on unionizing at the Amazon warehouse in Alabama. And I've been doing a lot of research and I've been doing a lot of reading. And one of the big things that like struck me today as I was doing a lot of reading was that a lot of folks that have been involved in the labor and unionizing movement at the Amazon warehouse believed that mainstream liberal media really hyped up and interfered with the movement, so much so to the fact that a lot of people thought it was in the bag, thought it was locked down, and became very like, oh, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. And they weren't really doing a lot of coverage around what Amazon was actively doing to try to like not only stop them from unionizing, but to making it very clear that they were going to intimidate all of their warehouses across the country, that you cannot unionize at any of their warehouses. And then the other thing too is that in the research and the reading that I was doing is that mainstream media no longer covers labor with the interest of a worker in mind, and that they cover labor from this perspective of like, how does labor issues impact the product that you're supposed to be receiving? So like, let's say the milk union or the milkers of America, the dairy folks of America, were like trying to unionize and strike at dairy farms all over the US. The way that mainstream media covers that is like, will you get your gallon of milk tonight? More on at 9, instead of like, dairy workers in America have these horrible working conditions and these horrible living wages. Therefore, they are trying to come together as a community. I also, read how like one of the granddaughters of one of the Disney execs like had no idea that like people at Disney parks were like on food stamps and getting paid horrible, and one day went in and like she has like a special card that she gives them to get like all the tickets that she wants throughout the year for free, and that one of the Disney employees like slipped a note with the card that was like, you need to help us, and like having her eyes open to the fact that like all of these things were going on inside of Disney parks, And so I wanted to talk about the labor movement and how mainstream media has really like changed in how they view or how they report on labor, especially as this thing in Amazon, the Amazon warehouses, right? Jeff Bezos he's the richest man. Is that like active? Because I think like somebody had trumped him, maybe. No pun intended. Jeff Bezos is one of the richest. He's one of the richest people in the world. He has tons of money, and there are people in Amazon workhouses that are making okay money, right? It might be better than the national minimum wage, but it's still not enough for them to be able to provide for themselves. And not only that, but the working conditions for those people. There have been reports that Amazon workers to make sure they have high productivity rates and that they don't get docked for not having productive times. So I'll explain that a little bit before I go into it, right? Amazon workers, when they first start, they're told to download an app. The app tracks their movement in the factory, and it tracks what their time is. So like if they're at their station and they're doing work, it counts it as productivity time. If they step away and they go to the bathroom, it docks their time, saying that it was unproductive time. And so there are like stories of Amazon workers that like would pee in bottles in order to avoid going to the bathroom and not have low productivity rates. And so there are all these stories around how these Amazon workers across the country that are out there trying to get your prime when you're complaining about not having your thing in 2 days, or when you're complaining about some product not being available. There are these people that are working like tirelessly long hours under like a really watched eye from Amazon, and they're not getting paid that well, and they're not getting treated well. And so there was this movement at the Amazon trying to combine all these words, at the Alabama Amazon plant to get them to unionize. And so there was a lot of hype from the liberal media, and they were like the pretty much the idea, or like the feeling was it was gonna happen. It was this movement of labor. Bernie Sanders was involved. Joe Biden made a whole like comment about how people are the only ones that decide to unionize. Period. Like all these people got involved, and at the end of the day, the vote turned out to be like 2-1 against unionizing. And so the stories that were produced by media was very much this idea of like, they get okay pay, they're looking for something better. Jeff Bezos should do it, right? Is that his name, Jeff Bezos? I'm not making that up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just saying names at this point. And so, but the real thing that was happening, right, is that there's like horrible working conditions. There's intimidation from Amazon management, and there are movements across the country to have people getting paid the least amount of money in the worst kind of conditions while producing really high results for companies, right? There's the wealth is at the top of the company, and all of the workers and the laborers at the bottom of the company, they get the bare minimum. And so I wanted to start talking about the labor in the U.S. and your thoughts around this Amazon plant in Alabama and how it's going to impact the movement of any other plants, because other Amazon plants across the country and other workers across the country that have been thinking about unionizing were closely watching to see, one, what Amazon had up its sleeve, what kind of tactics they were going to use, but also what the group in the company was going to do. And so to talk a little bit about that, I do want to talk about some of the things that Amazon did do, in fact, right? So outside of the Amazon plant in Alabama, there was a stoplight where before you got out and you turned, workers would come out and talk to people that were leaving for the day about unionizing. The Amazon plant lobbied and pushed the local government to get rid of the stoplight. Stoplight got moved. It's gone. You no longer could go out and talk to your coworkers and tell them about the union. One of the other things that the Amazons did is that they had a mailbox put out and across the street from the plant so that they said it would make it easier for folks to go and vote in person. But really what was happening is Amazon was trying to track who was voting for unionization. The other thing that Amazon did was that they, legally they cannot do this, was they were having mandatory unpaid meetings. So you would have to go on your own time. It was a mandatory meeting. You could not wait. And while you were there, if you were asking questions that seemed like you were pro-union, you would get put on a list. And Amazon was actively telling you things like the union is going to take your money and they're not going to let you have a collective voice, and you're going to be forced to do things that the union is going to want to do. All the things that you legally cannot do, Amazon was doing it because who's going to stop them, right? No one is stopping them.
Right.
So there was aggressive tactics, and I think that people who view this often think like, oh, well, this is about the plant in Alabama and that's it. But the really broader issue of what was happening is that this was Amazon's aggressive go at making sure that they stopped any kind of unionizing movements across the country at any of their plants. And I think that part of that responsibility, right, is on mainstream media and how there has been this shift in coverage of labor from like the product as opposed to the worker, and also like the views of people who like actively view unions as bad things. And I'm full transparency, like unions have their dark sides too, like absolutely unions have their dark sides,
of course.
However, the collective voice of workers and laborers is an important one in order so that like workers aren't trampled, underpaid, undervalued, and overworked. And so let's start there. What are your thoughts? We can start with you, Beacon, on the whole Amazon Alabama plant unionizing movement.
I mean, it's gross in terms of what happened and what's the tactics that Amazon uses to union bust. There has been their tactics have been known for a while. You know, there's videos on YouTube of internal propaganda, frankly, as to, you know, why you shouldn't join a union. And those have been around for years. And it is so disheartening to see um, how much the priority is on the product and not the people, and not the people that are making, supplying, distributing the product. And that is endemic throughout the entire country. And you know, you pointed out that um, both Amazon workers across the country and Amazon corporate were watching the results of Alabama to see how to, you know, what their next move would be. But it's not just Amazon that was watching, it was all corporations across the country that do not have union staff were watching to see what tactics they can use that would be effective for when their worker population is going to try to unionize. So it's a nationwide problem because of course we as a country value and prioritize product and profit over people, and so it's very upsetting and disheartening. And I I don't really know what else to say other than that. It's just so so cruel, you know, seeing the different reports of all the different um, things that Amazon employees have to do to be able to meet the numbers, as it were, you know, to pee in bottles and whatnot, all for just a minimal pay and putting yourself in unsafe working conditions. And that's before COVID. There was unsafe working conditions in so many ways, let alone during COVID. One of my roommates worked at Amazon when he first moved in for quite some time, and it saps the life out of him in so many ways. And you know, thankfully he's gotten out of that job and is doing other things. But it is just really absurd when you know, so I dropped him off at work a few times, and you see the Amazon warehouses. They are just nuts. It is, you know, you can call it dystopian, you can call it cruel, you can call it so many different things. It is not how things should be. It is not how workers should exist and work in a workplace. Um, and yet, as you said, there's nothing like, who is going to say anything to Amazon? Who is going to stop them? Who is going to stand up to them?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you know, Bezos just continues to accumulate wealth and generate more profit during COVID than he did in years prior.
Yeah. The lead organizer that was moving to unionize at the Amazon plant, one of the reasons primarily that she did it, she got the job, she was looking for work, she was super excited, it was higher pay than, like, you know, a lot of other places. And you know, when she was talking about it, she spoke about how at first it was really good. She felt really good. She felt like she was making decent money. She said the moment that things changed was that Amazon started doing random searches of their employees to make sure that stuff wasn't leaving the plant when they went out on break. And that, it was a random search. You randomly, when you're leaving, you get selected or not. And that one of the times when she was going to go on break, she was randomly selected. And they were like, well, go to this line over here. And that they took her to the line over there. And that, the search took like 15-20 minutes of her break time. And at the end of it, she was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go start my break now. And they told her, well, you've been on break. This whole time you have been on break. And that she asked, well, why wouldn't I get my time back this all was as a result of you all. You all stopped me from leaving. It was not my choice to not be out of here and be on break. And that they were like, oh, well, you can go and talk to this person. And one of the tactics that Amazon uses, very much like Uber and a lot of these younger tech companies, is they encourage you to use like texting or to call 1-800 numbers, and you can't actually get a hold of a live person, and they expect you to like put in a form, and you can't actually get a hold of your manager, and like that really delays the process, and they hope that you'll give up and they'll just move on, right? And so she said that she experienced that, and that was what did it for her. That they stopped her from leaving. They took her time, and then they're like, well, we're not going to give you that time back. And so then she started talking to people, and of course, a lot of people are experiencing this. You're getting stopped for random surges that take 15 to 20 minutes. Let's say you had a 30-minute break. Your break is basically gone. You can go and get water, maybe pee, and then you have to go back to work. And so that was one of the primary reasons why she felt that she had to like start getting folks to unionize so they can have a collective voice, so that they can then negotiate with the management at the plant, the Amazon plant. Vega, your thoughts on like the labor and unionizing movement, or the union busting movement that Amazon did at the plant in Alabama?
Well, union busting is part of this country's history, from the beginning of all these labor movements happening at the turn of the century. So now everything has been kind of propaganda against unionizing. And, with the Alabama case, yeah, that was bound to happen. What had happened was that certain stories started getting leaked out, and politicians such as AOC and Bernie Sanders were responding to that, and that's what caused a lot of attention to be drawn to this, to the point where we got to see Amazon's techniques in union busting, which I find to be much more telling. And the thing is that there's a lot of reasons why a vote like that can fail. I mean, you ask the question of the people, and 2/3 of the people said no. So that just happens. That doesn't mean it's not gonna come up for a vote again. That doesn't mean, like, the way that they, like, I like that you have been pointing out specifically about the media's role in this, because the way that it's being written and talked about is as if this is the only shot that these people had. It's not. They're going to have another vote. They're going to talk about unionizing again. It's going to be happening all over around the country. But it was important for the media to portray it like this, so that it could do its part in kind of creating the propaganda that these giant corporations need to kind of help sow the idea that, like, hey, look, they tried. It's not good. Amazon's already doing a whole bunch of stuff. Just, you know what? Just enjoy it. Forget about unionizing. You don't need that. And media has always played a part in that. Especially once like marketing started to actually become a thing. From that point forward, everything was being looked at from a perspective of how do we get the most amount of profit from this? What do we need to say to make people want to buy this? And a lot of that comes with kind of going back to that previous comment that you had mentioned about oh god, I'm forgetting it, when you were talking about why is it that like people kind of like look at things in the perspective that they spoke that affects them. A lot of that comes from that kind of propaganda, that kind of marketing and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that, like, the way that a lot of things get sold is by acting as if you're speaking directly to a single person, telling you that you are the most important person in the world and you need this in order to make you even more important. Yeah.
Just real quick, Vega,
that kind
on that
of messaging. Yeah,
just real quick, I just want to give the history on that, right? So media, the mainstream media, the history on how that works is that in the past, they directed and directly marketed workers, right? And so labor movements were like being reported on by like sometimes actual laborers and workers themselves that were then labeled a reporter and wrote an article, and then it got published in a newspaper. Mainstream media has moved away from targeting workers to more affluent, college educated, middle class folks. And so now their target is to talk about the product versus the worker, which is why it's important to note that like today, if you see a story, you know, like a lot of the media, they were like, will your Amazon package get delivered on time? Stay tuned at 9 because there's a plant that might strike or unionize, versus the workers at this plant in Alabama have shitty working conditions. They're underpaid. And so that's just to give people history on like the mainstream media moved away from like having actual workers that were like writing the articles to having more college educated, and their market and demographic that who they were targeting and selling to also changed, which is why their stories changed. And like now there's this shift. I just wanted to go ahead and jump that in there.
No, of course. Yeah, and thank you for that, and thank you for kind of like pointing that out, because I mean, if you market it from looking at the product, you're positioning it from a place of this is going to inconvenience you, and therefore you should not like it. If you actually talk about it from a worker's perspective, then people start to recognize the similarities. It's like, wait a minute, I get treated like that at my job too. Does that mean that my job's not good enough? And start asking those kinds of questions, and start asking other people those questions, and start kind of like gathering a collective in order to improve your working environment. um and like mainstream, the like the directors behind like news shows and stuff like that, behind the mainstream media, they're very well aware of this, and they get directives directly from, you know, these boards and these corporations to speak on it from that perspective. Because again, most of these news companies, they're all part of mega corporations as well. So of course it's gonna like they're gonna continue to look at it from that perspective, because even the creation of the propaganda itself is being looked at from a perspective of how do we convince the most amount of people um, to watch this, to consume this, um, in order to get the most amount of profit. So like it's at no point is the actual needs of the people, at no point is the actual needs of the worker ever taken into perspective and given a platform to speak on that. Because if that was the case, then a lot more people would be able to relate to it. And if you have a lot of people relating to the fact that maybe this stuff doesn't work, then these corporations, these CEOs, all these people making all the big bucks, they have a problem, and they don't want that. So I, you know, I would kind of like caution against looking at these stories of like places like Bessemer, Alabama, and stuff like that, and reading about them from like the major, understanding that anything that you might read about these things, always try to see what is it that the actual people are experiencing, what are they feeling, and try to remove the parts of it that are talking about how you're going to be inconvenienced. Because at the end of the day, if I get my Amazon package a week later, means that all Amazon workers get healthcare and get treated like human beings, then I will take the package a week later. I don't care about the inconvenience. We will adjust to the inconvenience. We didn't always have these conveniences. We can live without them. If it means that people will have equitable lives, I don't see why not.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
and I
it's,
think that
go
if
ahead.
you asked, oh, I was just going to say, I think that if you asked the average person if they are willing to, have a package be delayed by a couple of days, or to have better conditions for Amazon workers, or thinking about like healthcare or education or other federally funded things. If you say, hey, would you be willing to pay a couple extra cents, on taxes, or a couple extra cents when you do whatever, and it means all these other things, it probably work. But of course, that's not messaging that is going out. That is not the marketing that is going out. And you have active propaganda that is saying that is not the case. And I just this kind of goes back to in a way a discussion about community. That when you've got a group of people together and I see themselves as a community and identify as a community, then they're going to want to take care of each other as a community. And pretty soon you realize you don't need the police, you don't need these different corporations that are negatively affecting the community. So when you have that approach, you can get a lot more done.
Yeah.
I also want to point out real quick, that the conversation always tends to go towards like, how are we going to be inconvenienced at this? And at no point has it ever looked at the fact that maybe we shouldn't be the ones that should be paying for these things. Maybe it should be this top 0.1% of the country that has 40% of the wealth that should be paying more for this, because the kind of money that is required to be able to improve people's lives is so minuscule to the amount of money that they've been able to amass. There is no reason why we should be focusing on what it is that we have to quote unquote give up. But of course, that's not what they're going to try. They're going to try to make sure to steer the conversation away from that. It's the same reason why we have the conversation that talks about like, climate change is because we're not recycling enough. It's like, no, it's these big companies are going around taking as many resources and just dumping waste everywhere and creating this situation. We are not holding them accountable to the fact that they are actively destroying our lives.
Yeah, I was just looking up that Amazon's, for the first quarter of 2021, Amazon's sales were between $100 and $106 billion. And I guarantee you that a small portion of that goes out to like compensation, like salaries and staffing and all of their hourly part-timers. So yeah, I agree with you, Vega. I believe that the responsibility here is it shouldn't always lie on the people, right? Like, yeah, absolutely. If you're like, Freddie, Amazon Prime is unrealistic. You can get your package between 7 to 10 business days, just like with every other person that ships you a package. I'd be like, cool, run me back that Amazon Prime money that I pay you a year. And I don't need that expectation. Totally fine with it. But there should also be this expectation that you are amassing billions of dollars in sales and profit, and that you should pay your workers better than a living wage. There should be no reason why your workers are struggling. There should be no reason why they have access to healthcare. There should be no reason why they have access to breaks. And there should be no reason why they're being screwed over by a multi-billion-dollar company that globally is like serving people everywhere. And I think that like the other important thing and why I wanted to talk about this is because labor movements have existed in this country since forever. And every time it's a very similar story, maybe differently. And maybe there are different characters, maybe there are different companies, and maybe there are different issues, but it's always the laborer or the worker being screwed over by a big profit corporation or company or group that is making a lot more money and paying their laborers a lot less, right? And I think that I also want to remind people that like labor and unionizing movements and like worker organizing movements in the history of our country are the reason why our workers are not like dying at work, why our workers have limited amount of time of hours they can spend at a job, why our workers have breaks, why our workers do get like all sorts of benefits. And so labor movements and like worker organizing movements are important. And I also do want to point out, just like Vega said, this isn't the end. That Amazon plant, like, this is not the end. This was the first step in what I'm sure will be a long battle to arrive to a place where they can unionize. And I think that this is going to just further like strengthen the fact that Amazon went above and beyond to like intimidate to union bust and to shut down this movement of collective workers that want to come together and get better, like, quality of work environment, quality of pay, like all of the things that they deserve, right? As a person who uses Amazon and, like, you know, like, it's very easy and convenient. So you can go and you can find anything. Like, you can find the things you can find on Amazon is wild. And oftentimes we don't think about it, right? Because we often operate with blinders. In that moment when we're in front of our computer and we're searching for a glass cutter because you want to make candles out of old fucking gin bottles that you've been collecting for 4 years. True story. I know that was very specific.
I was about to say, someone has a lot of experience.
No, it's very specific. I know, it's very specific. You know, but in that moment, I'm not thinking about the worker in Bessemer, Alabama. I'm not thinking about the working conditions of people at the Amazon factories. And the fact is, I should be thinking about how I'm spending my money. And that, again, that brings us into capitalism. There's going to be a whole show devoted to capitalism and how we're going to work our way out of it. But we have to really remove our blinders, and we have to be a lot more open-minded and, like, visual to, like, what the actual experience of what we are doing in, right? Like, every single thing of when I go to, like, have an Amazon experience affects everything, to, like, the janitor at Amazon, to the person that's, like, picking the items from the Amazon shelves, to the person that's boxing them, you know, to the delivery drivers that are, like, out on the streets making sure that you get your package. And so it's an important thing that's happening in Bessemer, Alabama, and I'm sure that this is not the end. They've already contested. One of the big things that they hope is going to come from them is that they will be able to mount legal challenges so that Amazon is not able to use the tactics that they used in Bessemer, Alabama at any of their other plants across the U.S. So things will come from this. Working, organizing, and labor movements will continue to push forward to protect and serve laborers and workers. And it's important to note that, and it's important to see that. And the media really does need to do a better job of presenting a story that is, like, based in facts on the actual impact and why a worker is, like, being underpaid and has horrible working conditions versus, oh, your prime might not get there in 2 days. It might get there in 7 to 10 because of this. So, labor in
we
America.
need more reliable independent news.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. So, I know we were going to talk about other things, but as is the case with us, we talk a lot. So we will talk more next week of other things, but I'm still committed to ending lighter because we always talk about such heavy things that are important. And so I wanted to ask folks to share a happy moment that they had this week. I will start. The happy moment I had this week was my dad has heart issues, and so he went in to get an angiocardiogram to see about his arteries and how blocked they were, and in the procedure they were able to unclog them, and so my dad won't need a stent, he won't need open heart surgery, and so that was my happy moment of the week. My dad is 77 years old, he's still trucking along, but we were very afraid of what this moment has, and so my happy moment of the week is that, like, my pops was kicking and he's ready to come back to work at the shop. You folks don't know this, but my dad works at the shop with us, but since the pandemic has started, we have not let him come back to work, but he's ready to come and boss everybody around because that's what he does. But that was my happy moment of the week. Beacon, Vega, do either of you want to share a happy moment that you had this week?
I mean, nothing like that.
See, I was like, maybe you should go last, but then I was like, you should model and give them time in case they need to, like, think of a happy moment. And then, but then I also had this fear where I was like, well, nobody's going to want to go after your dad's angiocardiogram having come out that his arteries were unblocked. But your happy moments are just as great as happy as those. I'll do it.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Vega.
Oh, Yeah, this is definitely nowhere near that, but it is a moment that made me happy. Was I was playing, my game that I usually play, Final Fantasy 14, and I finally figured out how to work this one class. I finally figured out how to do it, and it made me feel very accomplished because it can like the game is a very daunting game. It has a lot of stuff and it throws a lot of information at you. So being able to figure things out how they work and how to actually make things function, um, for especially for me, um, was an accomplishment. So I felt very accomplished. I felt very proud of myself. I
Yeah.
know it's nothing like your dad, but
No, listen,
it made
I
me
have
happy.
watched many playthroughs of Final Fantasy, and that game is so complex. And so that's badass. Congratulations. That is a happy moment. Let me wait. I hope it's back. It's back. The DJ air horn is back. I think that's dope. And listen, I love Final Fantasy. I'm still waiting to finish or watch the final playthrough of this last one. Beacon, happy moment of the week for you.
To bring it full circle and talk about Star Trek again, I started watching Star Trek Next Generation with Duke in the past week, which has been really, really fun. And it has been very interesting because if you haven't seen the first season of Next Generation in a while, there's some really rough episodes.
Oh my god.
Really, really rough characters. And for whatever reason, I was up late watching like just random scenes from later seasons of Star Trek and just seeing how fully realized the characters are, later on, compared to where they start in the first season. It's like, I'm so glad that they had enough time to fully develop those characters. But it's been fun. I think that, let's see, the first episode is giant space jellyfish.
Yes.
There's an episode about polygamy.
Yes.
Not about, but it features polygamy.
Mhm.
And then there's the high schooler getting drunk, essentially, which is like Wesley.
Yes.
It's the naked now when, yeah. So
Oh
it's,
my
the first few episodes
god.
were fun. Yeah.
I hate the holodeck
I
episodes.
forgot.
I absolutely cannot stand the holodeck episodes. Whenever the holodeck episodes start, I'm just like, fast forward, next episode. Like, I don't want to see you spend time in like old world. I want to see space.
That's valid. That is valid.
I feel like the only fun holodeck episode for me was the one where Moriarty, they make Moriarty, and it's so smart that it changes the holodeck to make it seem like they're inside the ship, and kind of tricking them to try to release him into the real world. That was the only fun one that I that sticks out to me in my mind.
Yeah, I may have to
There's-
rewatch that. I vaguely remember the Moriarty episode, but I'm gonna have to rewatch it. You were gonna say something, Beacon?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the quotes. Fuck. Oh, yeah. The other Holosuite is like not necessarily explicitly Holosuite, but it is on Deep Space Nine when they play baseball against the Vulcans, and Worf's like, sports rallying cry is death to the opposition, which is just the best. I want to hear that at more baseball games.
You should have a shirt made, and you should go to a Dodgers game. Death to the opposition.
Oh my god.
Shit.
I love that.
Cool. Let's see what I got for you. Let's see. Let's give you.
Sure.
That's where your TNG happy
Someone
moment
take
of
this
the
away
week.
from Freddie, please.
Thanks, Brennan.
I'm gonna download more of these sounds for next week. I'm gonna be ready.
You don't have to.
I,
You don't have to.
I know you secretly want me to.
There's no rush, Freddie. Really.
There's no rush. Okay,
No.
thanks for that patience, but I'm gonna make it happen for everyone. Thank you so much for your time and your labor and for allowing your brains to be picked. I appreciate the time and space that we shared. Thank you, everyone. We'll be here next week, and it'll be more sound effects and and TNG references. Don't forget. Don't forget.
Come for the politics, stay for the next generation.
That's right. Come for the politics, stay for the war on Christmas, the war on J-Lo, and the TNG references. Good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest. Death to the opposition. That's how we're going to end this. Death to the opposition. Good night, everyone.
Good night.